speak about parenting in terms of giving you vision and hope that it's going to be okay with your parenting and that there really is there's incredible value in getting together like this around the topic of parenting, because you will find if we can influence this next generation and we are raising as families and even if you think of the influence that your family has in the circle of friends that you have and the family, your extended family, by making a difference with your children, you really will influence a lot of people. Yeah. And very importantly, when one day when you are old and maybe would be in need of an old age home or frail care, just remember your children will choose that that part of your life for you. So you want to get it right. You know? So, anyway, if you can just pop. So this to introduce our family. We, as I said, we got the 4 kids. Oh, Sheila can introduce them. Yeah.
So these are our 4 beautiful children. So we've got Emma in the middle. This photo was taken a month ago. She came back from Canada. Thomas, so Emma's 19, Thomas is 17, John is 14, and Sandile is 13. We adopted Sandile when he was 4 months old, and he's just turned 13, so it's official. We've got no more children in the house. We've only got teenagers before Emma hits her 20s. So this is our gang, and we're from Pietermaritzburg. We
used to lead a church.
Yeah.
But we've led a church for 7.5 years, but we've actually just this last Sunday handed over the leadership to another younger couple, and so from now on we are elders in the church, but are not actually officially leading it anymore. And yeah, so we what do you mean? Okay. So you'll notice that Sheila and I will interrupt each other and teach together, and I think it's because as anybody who's been married for any length of time, any man will recognize the incredible wisdom in their wives, and it would be very lopsided if only I was to teach, because Sheila is obviously very central in our family. So, but just to put it in perspective, you know, we love our children, and I think the fact that you are here, you clearly are serious about your parenting, you're serious about your children, you're wanting the best for them. And we found when Emma was a few months old, 3 or 4 months old, as much as we loved her and wanted the best for her, we found that we knew nothing about parenting. and she was just, it was chaos at home, and she wasn't sleeping, and we weren't sleeping, and our relationship was coming under strain because we weren't sleeping, and it's all about sleep actually at the end of the day. And we were really struggling, and we realized we needed to equip ourselves as parents, and we started to go on courses like this. We read books, we did a whole lot of things, and over the years we have learnt so much from other people, and our heart really is just to share what we have learnt. I mean, so it's not in a sense original material that we've come up with of us by ourselves. Some of it is things that we've learnt, our experiences. But really what we're going to be teaching on is biblical principles. God has a lot to say about parenting in the scriptures, and it's incredibly helpful to do things, as I'm sure you know, if you do things God's way, it's amazing how He blesses that. So that's our heart, is to just share with you what we've learned over the years and to encourage you with that.
I think what is so freeing is that we can say that if you follow God's ways, it goes well. If you do marriage according to His principles, you have a good marriage. If you do your finances according to His principles of generosity and tithing and giving, it goes well. If you do parenting according to God's principles and ways, it goes well. And we're seeing it in the fruitfulness of our children. They are not perfect. We've had ups and downs. We spend a lot of time praying and asking God for wisdom. However, if we apply God's principles, it works. And just to give you hope for those of you with little ones, it's so gorgeous. Do you know that we are loving our teenage years? They are amazing. We're absolutely loving our young adults. It's a rich, rich, rich season. And I remember when Emma was 2 years old and Thomas was a tiny baby, an older man in our community said, I love my teenage boys. It can go well. And I remember thinking, really? I'd only ever heard that teenagers were terrible and hard work. So just a quick question. What are the age groups here? So that when we give examples, we can give that are pertain to your age groups. So who's got 0 to 5-year-olds? All of you. Okay. Who's got 5 to 10? Okay. And then say 10 to teenagers 10 to 18. Okay, cool. And then above? Okay, lekker. Wow. That's amazing. You sound like a friend of ours who's had a child in every decade. In their 20s, 30s, and 40s, they had children.
Yeah. Sure. Okay.
Okay, so we'll try and have examples that can help everyone.
Yeah. So just being aware of time, we might miss out a few. You'll see we'll jump ahead a little bit on things that we have to leave out just from a time point of view. But really what we are wanting to establish over the next two nights and Saturday morning is bigger picture vision with your parenting. And because you think about it, like this map that I've got behind me on the screen, if you were told that you've got to get from the southern part of Cape Town in South Africa right up to Cairo in the north of Africa, you could think of the road as actually incredibly detailed. I mean, you would take a very detailed route, and sometimes with our parenting, we get lost in the detail because it's just the daily routine of nappies and getting dressed for school. Have you done your school homework? Meals, one meal after the other, and then it goes in one side and it's come out the other side. You've got to deal with that, and it's just like that daily detail of life. And sometimes we forget where we're going with our parenting. And what we're wanting to do in this time is to truly inspire you to think about the bigger picture of who you are raising. You're not raising children, you are raising young adults who are going to leave your home one day. And you're really wanting to be thinking all the time, even in the daily detail of your life, of why it's important to have good discipline in your home. Why is it important to have good sleeping habits? Why is it important to have children who behave well at the dinner table? Whatever your daily routines are, if you're thinking about them in terms of the long term, what does this look like when my child leaves home at 18, 20, 23, whatever age it is? Because I want my children to leave home. At some point, they are out my house. They mustn't live with me forever. And I really want to encourage you and to cause you to think about, to sort of take your eyes off what's happening tonight and tomorrow and next week, and think, what's going to be it like? What is the fruit of my parenting? What is the fruit of your parenting when your children leave home? So that's what we are going to be doing. I'm very happy to, in our style of teaching, you see I've got a picture of a landmine blowing up. I don't know what it's like in Zimbabwean sort of general culture, but in South Africa, it's a sensitive topic, parenting. If you start to criticize somebody else's child, and you're sort of like, well, what sort of behavior is that? People take it very personally. It's like a landmine issue. They'll just blow up. How dare you challenge my parenting, and or my children. And so when we talk in this time, there are going to be things that I might say that you'll be like, wow, how can he say that? Or that offends me, or something like that. But I really want to say my heart is not to offend anybody. And if you do feel challenged or something like that, you're welcome to ask questions and raise a different viewpoint. It's quite a small group. It's very easy to ask questions. I'm happy if you want to interrupt and say, I don't understand that example that you used, or have you thought about this, or we tried that and it worked really well. I would really encourage you, let's as a group take this topic together. It doesn't just have to be us teaching all the time. You are welcome, as I say, to ask questions and raise points. Are there any single parents here in the group? No single parents. Okay, then don't worry. But could you just go forward 2 slides? We would sometimes, when we teach this to other groups, there would be single parents, and it's helpful just to be able to talk to that. I also want to say this about condemnation. I don't know if you found this in your life. When you look at the scriptures, it paints a picture of this ideal situation. So let's say, for example, look at sanctification and holiness. The scriptures make a very high standard for what God expects of us or how he wants us to live our lives. And it doesn't take you long to realize that you fall short of that standard. And you have to be able to live with that gap between what you know is a standard of holiness and the reality of your life and the outworking of that in your Christian faith. And likewise, when we talk about parenting, we are going to be presenting things at a very high standard, and you might be thinking, oh my word, we fall so short of that. Our children don't behave like that, or we don't think like that, or whatever it might be, and you're going to potentially feel like we are not good parents. I really want to state this very clearly. You are the best parents for your children. God gave you your children because he knows what's in your heart. He knows the destiny and the plan that he has for your children. And he placed them in your family. Your family is the best place for your children. And you must be convinced of that. So you are not perfect parents. And if you measure yourself against the ideal of perfect parenting, you are always going to fall short of that, and you will potentially feel that you are inadequate as a parent. So I want to encourage you, don't measure yourself against perfection, because you will never achieve it. Measure yourself against what you were like yesterday, because you can improve on yesterday. You can improve all the time. And if your life is characterized by growth and saying, you know what, we're not the best parents, but we were better than we were last year because we've learned a bit more and we are implementing what we've learned, then you are on the right pathway, and you'll find in partnering with God and the Holy Spirit working in your lives, you will suddenly find that it's fruitful. Your children are responding to your parenting and you're doing well. So don't ever feel condemned. Okay. Sorry? Do you want to do it? I think I'll mention this briefly. I talk a lot more about this if I've got a mixed group of believers and non-believers, because often we actually teach this parenting course quite often to non-believers, like just as an outreach, because you'll see, as you know, I'm sure, that God has the whole picture of God as our Father is the basis of parenting, and so there's very strong Christian worldview. We will teach using biblical principles, and but I just normally would explain that to a non-Christian audience, that this is what we are dealing with, is a biblical worldview. But I think most people here would probably say thumbs up. We're not going to argue about it. Good. Right. Okay, so most of you have a cell phone, I'm sure, a smartphone. And if you remember the day when you unpacked your phone and turned it on for the first time, it came with all sorts of apps that you never knew that you wanted in a phone. So if you open up your Samsung, and now there's Samsung this and Samsung, Messenger, and Samsung Cloud Services, and Samsung this, and advertising that you didn't think that you never want to see in your life again. And there were all sorts of things you didn't want on your phone that came with it. And likewise, you think of all the things that you actually want on your phone, maybe a banking app, Econet, some way to transfer, make payments, or other communication things, navigation, whatever it might be. They're all the useful apps. And that's what your children are like. So your children are born in the image of God, just like you are. You have every capacity for good in you. Every single person who is born on earth is born in the image of God. They will have the capacity to do radical acts of kindness and generosity. They will have the capacity to at the risk of their own lives, rush into a burning building and drag somebody out whom they're not related to. They have the capacity for all the justice of God, the goodness of God, the kindness of God, everything that the person of who God is wired into us as people. But because of the fallenness of mankind, we have an equal capacity for what for what Martin Luther in the 1600 called the utter depravity of mankind. The terrible nature of sin is inside of us also. So each of us has the capacity to lie and to steal and to be selfish and to commit acts of rape and murder. That capacity lies within us at the same time as the image of God is in us. And you might have noticed with your children, they are born with an amazing capacity to do both. They can show these, even as young children, incredible generosity and kindness and, oh, mommy and daddy, I just love you so much, and they're expressing their love to you, and then they go and do something incredibly selfish, and it's all about them, and they want their way, and they have a tantrum when they don't get their way, and it's like these apps in a phone. Your children come pre-programmed with selfishness and the potential for unkindness and the potential to lie and to do all these terrible things that you don't want to see in your children, but yet they have that same capacity to have all the good things that you want in a child. And so the role of parenting, the goal of your parenting is to uninstall all the bad stuff that is there and to install all the good stuff that you want to see in your children.
And it's a long-term process. It's layer upon layer upon layer, every day, every minute, every hour. It's not just a once-off quick fix, unfortunately.
So we are going to ask you some questions. Sheila will ask your questions.
Okay.
If you want to shout.
Yeah. Okay, so I was just getting on the same page. If I were to ask you right now, who are the top 5 richest men in the world?
Wrong question.
Yes. Oh.
Sorry, I'm getting the wrong question. What characteristics?
No, we do that first, and then we do the characters that we want to see.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, we're just having a quick little
Minor debate about where we are.
marriage moment. So, who are the top 5 people, richest men in the world, or women, people? Doesn't matter. Can you think? Yeah? Jeff Bezos, and like we have to really think about it, hey? No, you're not allowed to use Google. Bill Gates. Yeah, okay, all right. Who won the last 5 FIFA World Cups? 5 FIFA World Cups. Oh, we're racking our brains, hey? Germany won one. Definitely not South Africa. Oh, this man is like a walking encyclopedia. Mr. Google, we'll call you Google. Okay, let me make it harder. Who won the last 3 Nobel Peace Prizes? Yes. But we can't remember. Okay. Okay, then I got one last question. So the point I'm trying to make is we're struggling a bit to know these people who seem to be, in the world's eyes, so successful because they've won all these things. Who is the one person who made the greatest impact in your life? Your mum? A teacher, maybe? Uncle? As someone who's close to you, but you can remember that immediately. You can think of someone immediately, someone whom you had connection with, someone. So success, and that didn't matter, they didn't have to be the richest man or a Nobel Peace Laureate. The fact is that they made a huge impact in your life because of who they were and what they did for you. So the point I'm trying to make is success. We often are trying to find characteristics in our children that the world says is successful. I'm going to ask you a question now, and you must shout them out, please, because I'm going to write on the board. If you were to think of your kids, what characteristics would you like to see in your children? What for you is a successful child? For example, a kind child is lovely. You run with this because I need my hands.
Okay, so shout out some characteristics that you'd like to see when your children leave home. So we could carry on if we were to just keep throwing out things. We would design these amazing children You know, we would really have all the things, but what you'll find is, and we've run this course 15, 20 times, I don't know, in a range of audiences across many different socioeconomic strata, different cultural groups. There's something about all of it. We always come up with a variation on this. It literally will be the same sort of words. And almost all of the words will reflect something of godly character. It'll be, like you say, kind and generous and hardworking and persistent. I mean, at the end of the day, people end up describing, even unbelievers will describe God. They end up like this perfect picture of who God is, just other things that will come in, you know, the fruits of the Holy Spirit will all be sort of listed there, or however long you let it run. We end up designing this picture of who God is. And the point we try to make in this is that we as people, especially Christians, but even non-Christians, want to see this character. We want to see godly character in our children. But what you often will then find is we say, well, how much of your parenting energy, your intentionality of your thinking, how much of the time that you're spending with your children is getting that, is aiming for that, as opposed to aiming for a good education, well-fed, healthy, successful in terms of being able to run a business. So if you
and like being good at academics and sport, top of the sports team, and
those things they're not wrong. That's not sin, but that's the world's measures of success. And so much of our culture, and this is the point you try to make, is so much of our culture, and even as the Christians, we adopt that culture. We accept it as normal, that those are the measures of success. Good education, health, wealth, ability to run a business. All of those things are the measures that we aim for with our parenting. But actually what we want is that. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about is how do you build godly character into our children? And very importantly, it's how do we take the everydayness of life? Because your children are in your care every day, hour after hour, being fed and having nappies changed and going to bed and going to school, and that routine just sort of runs its course through and it changes over the years of your parenting, but there's the routines of life. We can use them to build that so that we don't lose that, because we don't want our children to not have that. So if you can go to the one about the garden, please. Let's go forward. Next one. Yeah. Okay. So I don't know if you guys have been to an amazing, what's the right word, established garden, like a botanical gardens, or if you've been into a garden that was maybe established over 150 years ago, and these beautiful big trees and well-planned sort of beds, and it's a place of great tranquility and pleasure to go there. That took planning. Somebody planned a beautiful garden. And I really want to put it to you that parenting is like planning a garden. Even if you think of it like a vegetable garden, you think about a gardener will have vision. He will say, I want to have these crops. I want to have, in 3 years' time, I'm going to want to have such and such a fruit, or 10 years' time, so I've got to plant the citrus trees now, and we'll get it in a period of time. Parenting is a bit like that. It's about planning and planting a garden. If you could just go to the next slide there quickly, and sorry, one more. Now, I'm an ecologist. I don't actually work for the church full-time. I work a lot with the rehabilitation of damaged lands, and as part of my work, I work a lot in nature reserves and areas of abandoned farmland, and weeds are a big issue. So what you're looking at in that slide there is a group of us working and clearing, doing an experiment and clearing invasive weeds. And I don't know if you have ever worked in an abandoned patch of land. Maybe you had a desire to plant a crop, a patch of mealies or something, and it's just full up with blackjacks and all sorts of rubbish that you don't want. It's unproductive. You know what happens when you just go and clear weeds and you pull weeds out the ground? What's the next thing that'll happen? If you go and weed a patch of ground and you just pull out the weeds. Has anybody done that?
Yeah.
More weeds come.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's, to bring the analogy back to parenting, Our children, like I was saying, have the capacity for good and the capacity for evil. Let's take the good as all the things that we want, the citrus crop, the big trees, the beautiful garden. And on the other hand, the garden of our children's hearts has the capacity to grow weeds, all the stuff we don't want to see in our children, selfishness, unkindness, and endless other things like that, tantrums, anger, rebellion, disobedience is naturally in our children's heart. And given space, it will grow. So those are like the weeds in the garden. So one of the things we'll try and teach a lot is that if your parenting style focuses on trying to pull out weeds, so you only ever, in a sense, are addressing bad behavior in your children, what ends up happening is that you clear the garden. You might achieve a measure of discipline in your children's life, but very quickly those weeds grow again. Sin, it lives in our heart. It's there. We never get free of it. On this side of heaven, we are not free of the power of sin. And given space, weeds will grow in our children's heart. And on the other hand, if we are investing in planting things, good crops, into our children's lives, what happens is those plants grow and they start to take over the garden, and you'll find that weeds do not grow where you have an established garden. They just don't get in. There's no space for them. So there's no light. I mean, weeds love lots of light. They like dry conditions. And the moment you've got a well-established garden, your weeding is reduced to pulling a plant there and pulling a little thing there and snipping that, and it's much lower work. So the point I'm trying to make in this is that we are going to be encouraging a style of parenting which focuses on bringing the good out of your children and not trying to squash the bad that is in there. You do both, but if your focus is always on trying to say, stop that, don't do that. If you listen to your parenting with your children, try and imagine over a week, what have you said to your children? How much of it was, stop that, don't do that, why don't you obey me? Why do you hit your brother like that? Why didn't you clean up that mess? And it's like that constant trying to weed the garden. You'll find the weeds just grow straight back again because nothing good has been planted to take over the garden. Whereas if you have a style of parenting which leans more towards saying, I love this about you, I love this characteristic, the way you were generous to your brother, the way you were kind to that old lady in the street, and you speak the good into our children, you find those things flourish at the expense of the weeds.
And every time we teach this, I get so challenged because I just think back of my last week and go, oh. So I really like it that we get to teach this a lot because it reminds me to be a better parent. So even though we've been trying to parent like this for the last 19 years, I still have to remind myself to not focus on squashing weeds, but to focus on elevating the beauty in my children.
So one of the ways, what we'll try and do is we will practically just say, this is how we did this in our family. So what we will often do is around the dinner table, we've got our 4 kids, and we'll, at some point in the day, we try and have one meal a day together as a whole family. It's not always supper, it depends on what's happening in the family life.
And it doesn't always work like that, but that's our aim.
We try to. Sometimes life just gets in the way, but we try and have some meal together. And in that time, we will never use that time for, in a sense, weeding the garden, saying, well, John, I really didn't like the way you did that today, or Sandile, when you spoke to your mother like that and were disrespectful, it really, got it. And we never focus on the negative ever at that time. The negative is there, and you do have to parent it. I'm not saying you don't parent it, but we will try as much as we can in the public forum of our garden, of our family meal. We will say, Emma, we noticed today when you were doing this with your friends, you were so kind to that one friend. I just want to say, really well done. Now, that child, certainly when she was younger, you'll just see your child, it's like, wow, mom and dad saw good in me. They just sort of sit up tall at the table. Or you might say to one of in our case, our 2 youngest, John and Sandile, are only 11 months apart. So sometimes there's a bit of friction between them because they're so close. And we'll say, guys, when you were playing today, we just loved the way you were able to have that game and you were so kind to each other. And both of them were like, wow, sure. And they just, that affirmation of the parents, especially, I want to put it to you, especially fathers. There's something about the father's voice here where we speak, when we recognize a godly characteristic in one of our children, speak it out, say it, even if you just saw the glimpse of it, and your child has got 9 out of 10 things were bad that day, but there was 1 out of 10 that was good. Say it, speak it out, because every time as a father or a mother, but particularly as fathers, when we say, I saw that in you, I saw it, well done, you'll find you're planting something that will grow and shade out all the 9/10 that you don't want.
And there are seasons in your life where your children, you think, I don't see any good. And the beauty of it is that we have Jesus. And we can ask him, show me one thing, please, that is good about this child right now. Hey? Your kids don't do that to you, hey? And then you find that one thing. And then you speak life and you say, I love that about you. It's amazing. It literally makes that lemon tree grow bigger and bigger and start shading out the weeds.
So make sure, here's a central message to take home. Is in the verbalizing of your parenting, when you are speaking to your children, correcting or however you're doing it, make sure the balance of your speaking is emphasizing the good you want to see and not the bad you don't want to see. You will address the bad. It's not right to have disrespectful children or disobedient children, but emphasize the good so that you coach yourself as parents to be verbalizing that which you want to see. It's almost like a prophetic action. Sometimes you have to find the least thing and you start to speak that into being, and your voice brings it out. You're bringing out the best out of your children when you do that. Okay, do you want to tackle this one? Okay.
And I'll do it.
Okay, go.
Okay, so we want to show you what happens when we neglect parenting, okay? So if you neglect something in a 1-year-old and you continue to neglect in a 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20, 30, 40-year-old, you will see fruit. The root will be the same. The expression might be different. So, for example, the tale of 10 tantrums. Da-da-da-da. Can you click? When they're this age, when they have a tantrum, it's really cute. Hey? Okay, next. Then it starts getting annoying. Then it's really embarrassing when it's in the shops. We've had it. We've got the stars and stripes. Then it becomes concerning. But let me just tell you, they're still having a tantrum. The root is the same. They're not getting their way. Why does a child have a tantrum in the middle of spa? You have spa here, hey? Yeah, just check I'm talking your language. It's because they're not getting their way. And then they become a teen. It becomes really frustrating, but she's still not getting her way. And there's another one. And then she becomes a 40-year-old woman who's still not getting her way, and we all take cover because she just loses it. Okay? Why did you choose girls?
Because
But that's what happens if we neglect something. So maybe your 2-year-old steals a sweet from the sweetie jar. And at 5, they take something, and it becomes, but when they're 40, they're cheating on their tax. The root of theft is the same as a 2-year-old, as a 40-year-old cheating on their tax. So we want to parent. It's easier to parent at this little age than it is when it's older.
So you'll find many things that, as parents, I mean, we know what it's like to be exhausted by your children and to be tired parents, and you've come back from a long day's work, and especially if both mom and dad are working, you come home and then you see a child doing, like, let's say, using manipulative behavior or lying or having a tantrum or whatever it might be. The temptation is not to deal with it because of your tiredness. But what happens is you forget that thing left unattended. I mean, how many of you have got work colleagues who lie or who are manipulative? If they don't get their way, they will have an anger fit. You know, it's so ugly when things are left into adulthood, and it's hard to deal with, and they often have incredibly negative consequences. So if you have a work colleague who is just explosive and they get angry whenever they don't get their way, you know, you don't want to be with them. You will avoid them. You will stay out of their way, and likewise, anybody with our children, we do them a great disservice if we allow unhelpful characteristics to persist in the long term. And we're going to show you that you can deal with, we'll teach you some of the tools of how you handle these things at different ages. But Sheila made the point, and I'd really encourage you, if you've got children under the age of 5 or 6 or 7, it's much easier to deal with these things. You can deal with them later on, and it's not to say you shouldn't. If you've got
you definitely can.
teenagers and you see something you don't like in your teenager, lying, a manipulative thing, you've got to deal with it. But it's easier when they're younger. So I'd really encourage you as parents, if you've got young kids, you're going to really work on it. Okay, and we're going to teach you how to do that. I think what we will do, we'll go for another few minutes. How are you guys doing? We can teach for a long time, let me tell you. So I think what we will do is in a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes or so, we'll have a leg stretch toilet break, and then we will then land on time at 8 o'clock.
Thank you for the water.
Yeah. Right, so so what I've done up until now is I've really tried to just lay a few sort of foundational principles of what we talk about. So now I want to start getting a little bit more specific and a bit more equip you and talk to you about discipline, the heart of discipline. And there's some foundational principles that we want to try and take you through. And I really want to point out that the English language does us a little bit of disservice here, because it started in modern day culture to say that we use the term, I'll have to discipline my children, as if we're going to have to, say, spank them or punish them in some way or another. So we started to use the word discipline to imply punishment. And I really want to emphasize that is not the correct use of the word. The correct use, which is what I'm going to try and talk about throughout this time, is the shaping of our children's hearts. Discipleship. It's what God does with us. When at the moment we become into the family of God, as we put our faith in Christ, so we enter into God's discipleship process, which He uses other people. He might use the church. He will use certainly other people to do that with us. He'll use the Holy Spirit, and He takes us on a journey of shaping our heart to be more and more like Christ. So that's what discipleship is. And as parents, we want to be very clear. When I use the word discipline, I'm not talking about punishment. I'm talking about the shaping of a heart. And we really want to know what we are dealing here. Okay, so if we go to the next slide there. So what is the goal of our discipline? So I really want to emphasize you can achieve, for example, obedience in your children like you would training a dog. And I don't mean that disrespectfully, but you can get your children to obey every single word you speak, either through very harsh punishment or through bribery or some other way of manipulation, the withholding of love. You know, if you want mommy and daddy to love you, then you better listen to them. Or if you do that, you will be punished. Or here's a sweetie if you be quiet in the shopping mall, or whatever it might be. You can achieve an outward good behavior by manipulating your children. And I use that word deliberately. Manipulate through fear of punishment, the potential withholding of love, or bribery. And so you can achieve a measure of success. And other people will say, wow, your children are so obedient. They seem to follow your every word. Even at a single glance at your child from across the room, you know, dad's sort of stern eye, or mom glaring at the children, you can get them to respond to you because they think, oh, mom and dad are cross, I better respond to that, I better adjust my behavior. And people will give you the thumbs up and say, well done, your children are well behaved. But that's not sufficient, to be honest. That's quite a low standard of parenting, which is something we're going to advocate that you don't do at all. Because if you can go to the next part of the slide there, what we are aiming for is not just children who are obedient because mom and dad tell them to be obedient. We are aiming for a child that when they grow up and become an adult and they leave your care and you are not the primary voice in their lives anymore and you can't threaten, bribe or manipulate them in any way, they are morally responsible. They can handle themselves. I mean, right now, we could take any one of our cell phones and access pornography, gambling, whatever we want. We can buy all sorts of illegal things. We can chat with the wrong sort of people. Husbands can chat to women who are not their wives. You can do what you want through a cell phone. And if our children, by the age of 14, 15, 16, whatever age you might feel to give them a cell phone, they have access to that world. There's no restrictions. Nobody's going to tell them don't do that because it's in the privacy of their room or in the bathroom at school or whatever it is. So if the goal is just obedience when mom and dad are around, it's a very low standard. We can't aim for that because it's not going to keep them when they leave home. I've got a very good friend whom I grew up with. His father was incredibly harsh, very strict father. He controlled every sort of movement of his son's life. And the children dared not step out of line because dad was, if they did, they got a smack, beaten on the bottom with a stick from a young age. And so all three boys in that family, three sons, were very obedient to mom and dad. The moment they left home, and I was at university with one of them, he's my good friend, man, did they go right off track. The mom and dad weren't around, so now there was women and drinking and all sorts of things that went on, some of which carried quite major consequences in his life. And they were very unhelpful, an unhelpful derailing. The moment mom and dad weren't around, he didn't have the inner character to sustain that obedience. And so what we're wanting to do, this is the first of the major principles. Whenever I talk about trying to achieve obedience in our children, and we will speak a lot about it, it's a good thing for your children to obey you. But always make sure that the goal is not their behavior, it's their heart. The only reason why you want your children to obey you is that one day when they leave home, they have a heart that is supple to God, that is going to be responsive to God and His obedience, His requirement for obedience. You do not want to settle at a very low standard where your children obey your voice only and you haven't won their hearts. Do you want to say anything on that, huh? Okay, so the next slide actually is probably, I think I've spoken a little bit about this. So shaping the heart, the process of discipline, is so much more important than just trying to control behavior. But I want to speak a little bit about, we're going to have a whole session on this later on. I think we'll do it tomorrow night, on obedience and how do you achieve obedience in your children. First time when you speak to them, son, do this, and they do it with a happy heart. That's a goal. It's a good thing that your children do that. But I want to make the point that when we are looking at obedience, we want to be looking at it from how can we use the goal of obedience to shape the belief system in our children's heart? How do we shape their character in their hearts? And we're going to have a whole session on this tomorrow night, on how do you use discipline and the goal of obedience to shape self-control. The reason for this is, and it's absolutely vital, is that when our children go into the world, if they do not have the ability to control their own actions, when you are not there, it's probably the greatest weakness they'll have. I mean, if you think of the times when you have had a lack of self-control and you've done something that you deeply regret, and you may still be living with that regret now and the consequences of that moment of lack of self-control. It is such a significant thing to see everything that we do in terms of disciplining our children to aim for self-control. So we're going to have a whole section on that tomorrow night, on how do you do that, and how do you, particularly in the early years, when they're in the 0 to say 7 years old, how do you take the daily routines of life and requiring your children to obey you, not because you want obedient children, because you want children who are able to control their own actions, to have self-control. So we're going to speak about that. I'm not going to talk more about it tonight. Okay, so just on this, to land on this particular theme, You can just bring up, there's a whole lot of sub-points. Just keep going. I'll put them all up at once. One more. That's fine. Just to make the point that discipline does not equal punishment. It's not the same thing. You'll find if your parenting is characterized by punishing your children as opposed to disciplining them, and I don't mean this critically because I've done both and seen the fruit of both. Punishment, if you think about it, is you are saying you've done something wrong, therefore we have to punish you. It's almost like it's like balancing the scale of good and evil. You're exacting the penalty of an offense. Whereas disciplining your children is aiming for a much higher standard. You are aiming for self-control, you're aiming for an understanding of good and evil, morality, and you are, it's a very different goal. If you are punishing your children, you're always in reaction to a bad something. They've done something wrong. Therefore, you punish them. You're in reaction. You're reacting to a bad deed. And whereas discipline, and we're going to, again, teach a lot on this, is how do you take a lot of your parenting from reacting to your children's behavior to being ahead of them, proactive, before they've fallen into error, before they've fallen into sin, before they've disobeyed. How do you get in there and parent at that space? Because you will, if you can do that, you are aiming for children who are not fearful of punishment, but who are behaving well because of a love for good. And that's a beautiful thing to have. Often, as parents, punishment comes out of a place of frustration. Your children, for the 18th time in the last hour, have done the same thing again and again and again, wrong, and you are angry and frustrated, and you end up punishing your children out of that place. We've done that as parents. You feel terrible afterwards, and it's often it's just a very unhealthy place for a parent to be. Whereas disciplining is not at all in reaction or not out of frustration and anger. It's out of a love for children. You're thinking, this thing left unchecked, if we don't deal with this, by the time they're 18, this thing's going to ruin their life. Out of the love for your children's future, you want to discipline them. And lastly, punishment often results in fear. If you think about it, if you were worried the whole time that God was going to punish you for your sins, you would live in a deep fear of God. You would potentially be obedient to Him, but your obedience would come out of fear. Oh my word, if I do this wrong, God's going to punish me, He's going to do all these terrible things to me. And whereas discipline, the heart that God has for us, is that we would respond to God out of love and out of an understanding of right and wrong and out of a love for good. And that's what the goal of discipline is. And we will try and teach you as much as we can how to do that. Our prayer is that, honestly, that your parenting would bear so much fruit from this that, you know what a legacy you leave behind when you parent well. Your children, if you think about it, you may have been parented terribly. I don't know how you grew up, but you may have had a parent, a father or mother who was just really harsh or something, and it really hurt you or something. But when you parent well, your children grow up, and that's just their normal. Like they are normally good. It's like it's not a major thing to be good, and they will teach their children, and you can have with a few generations time, they can be, from your parenting decisions made tonight or over this weekend, you can have an influence over hundreds and hundreds of people in the coming generations as the generation grows. It's an incredible responsibility to be a parent, and I really want to commend you for being out here tonight. And right. So here's what I'm going to try and tackle now, just to the rest of tonight, is 5 principles that apply across all ages, in all styles of parenting, everything that you're going to do, and I'll refer back to them again and again and again. By the end of this weekend, you will have it bashed into you, these 5 principles.
We don't do bashing.
I'll be unrelenting.
We do encouragement.
We will be unrelenting, and make sure you know this. Okay, so there is one standard of parenting, but there are many different personality types of children. So if you've got more than one child, you will have worked out quite quickly that child number 2 is very different to child number 1. And we have our 4 children, and the first 2 actually were quite similar, Emma and Tom. And by the time John came, and number 3, we were thinking we were quite good parents, because now we had learned how to parent Emma and Tom, and they were responding well to our parenting. And then John came, and he was totally different. And none of our parenting was working with him, and so we suddenly had to go back to rethinking how we parented. But the point of it is, your children, every single person who is alive on earth is so different from somebody else. Even twins, I'm sure you can ask Martin how his twin girls are quite different. From what I've seen of them, one is, they're just very different to each other. And so often you'll hear parents excusing the behavior of a child according to that child's personality. So, for example, you might say, if a child, for us, one of the things we wanted in our children is that they would be able to greet an adult respectfully. So when we'd go to lunch with friends or to family, and we would expect our children to greet the adults respectfully. But now some of those children are shy. All children are naturally shy. So they wouldn't want to greet the parents. And I heard myself saying it, and I've heard it, and now that I started to look out for it, I hear many people say, they'll excuse, John here, John's a bit shy. And so therefore you're basically saying John doesn't have to meet the standard of respect because he's got this thing called shyness. So what we're doing is we're taking the standard and we drag the standard down to the personality of the child. Now it is true that some children are more shy than others. Some will just rush up, greet, like John will greet anybody. He loves people, he's very confident. Whereas Emma, our eldest, was very shy to greet people. So the question I want to put to you is it right to adjust the standard to your different children's levels of obedience, or do you have to think differently about how do I get this child to the standard? So it's a bit like building. So you'll see all these building things up here. No matter where you go in the world, or you drive around a city, you'll see every type of building, from the ultra-wealthy through to the sort of average house, through to low-cost housing. Now, if it's in a municipality that is functional, so that's a big if, even in South Africa, the ideal is that there is a building code, so that no matter what you're building, I mean, Martin would be able to talk on this, he does a drafting and engineering, designing of houses. Theoretically, you have a building code, and no matter what house you're building, no matter what style house you're building, the foundations have to meet a certain standard, the windows and the doors have to be of a certain standard, the roof has to be able to withstand a certain strength wind, and so on and so forth. So there's the building code, and all houses are taken to the code no matter what you build. So in a similar vein, your children will be many, many different styles of personality, and some will be shy, some will be confident, some will be angry, more angry than others will be peace-loving, some will be naturally generous, others want to hold on to everything. And that's just who we are as people, the variety of people. God has one standard, and our job as parents is to say, we recognize the standard. We spoke about the standards. Standard of kindness doesn't change to different people. The standard of forgiveness. You think about it. Let's take forgiveness as an example for our own lives. So you may have had some terrible things happen to you. Some trauma that you didn't choose gets pushed into your life. Somebody robs you or beats you or does something like that. And then you might be tempted to say, God, I know I'm called to forgive this person, but that thing was so bad for me, surely you can't expect me to forgive. I mean, it's easy to forgive a small thing, but this thing that happened to me, it's so big, I can't forgive. So God never leaves that. He never says, okay, I realize that was really bad, so you don't have to forgive. But what does God do? He says, no, the standard is forgive your enemies. Forgive those who did these terrible things to you. And then he says, let me, through the power of my Spirit, extend grace to you, that supernatural power. I will help you come to that standard. That's how God parents us, okay? So God never says it's okay to lie, it's okay to steal. No matter how poor you are, it's not okay to steal. It's never okay to cheat. God's standard is there, no matter how desperate or whatever. That's how God is, okay? So parenting-wise, If you are aiming for a standard of kindness, of respect for the aged, for generosity, whatever it is that you have in your mind, never adjust that standard to the different styles of your children, the personalities of your children. You may have to get very creative, and you may really have to pray and ask God, how do I reach this child? This child, anger is such a problem for that child. Because, it really can be. They can be. You can have a child that has an anger problem. God, how do I bring that child to your standard of kindness or of peace or of being slow to anger? That's the standard. How do I do it? And you pray and you ask God. Maybe you go and get some specialist material. You read a book. You look on the internet. There's so many resources to help you to do this. So you might have to be creative. But don't ever find yourself, I challenge you, don't ever excuse your child's behavior by saying, oh, they are just like this, because you're dragging the standard to the child, and particularly in their hearing. So I hear so many, think about this, taking the respectful greeting. Okay, so for me it was an important value that my children would respectfully greet an adult. So I heard myself saying, I'd say, Emma, please would you greet Tendai? And she would just tuck herself into Sheila's dress, burrow right in, and hide her face. Okay, now that's not respect, okay? All of our children would do that. So I would say, oh, sorry, Tendai, Emma's a bit shy. Okay, now Emma's listening to this. So what is Emma saying? Oh, I'm shy. So you reinforce the very thing that you don't want because you embarrassed as a parent. Your child publicly disobeyed you. You said, greet the person, or don't do that, or do this, whatever, and they publicly disobey you. So you're embarrassed. So you, in their hearing, you reinforce it. You say, yes, they just like that. I can't help it. So you actually you set your child in a direction that you don't even want them to go on.
So it is really embarrassing. You've wanted your child to greet someone, and then what do you do when they don't do it? So you don't want to say, oh, please excuse Emma, she's shy. We learned this from someone. They said, sorry, Martin, we're working on this. We're working on Emma's greeting behavior. And then so we don't discipline her, we don't shout at her, we don't scream at her, we don't give her a kick in the moment. We say to her, so she's hearing, okay, we're working on this. Obviously, that's not allowed. And then in a private moment, we would then chat to her about it and parent her accordingly, which we'll show you how later. But that's a lovely byline. We're working on this. Sorry you had a tantrum in your house when you didn't give him a sweet. We're working on this.
Yeah. So anyway, so it's a key thing. Don't drag the standard that you know to be right down to your children. Okay, good. Second principle. Okay. So one will find, if one looks at the different styles of parenting, you generally find all parents will be either very authoritarian, where it's quite harsh, quite strict. It's all about the rules. It's about getting good behavior. And if you don't get the good behavior, you punish your children. So that's one style of parenting. You may have grown up in a family like that. On the other side of it, and this is becoming more and more common, particularly in Western society today, you'll see whole books, websites, philosophies of parenting, which are what we call child-centered. It's all about the happiness of the child. So you dare not punish or discipline the child. You dare not bring unhappiness to your child, because they might be, oh shame, they'll be affected for their whole life because they've been disciplined. They've never, you've had to say no to your child when they said they want ice cream or sweets in the shop, and you've had to say no, and they had a tantrum, and you had to deal with that, and the child's unhappy. So there literally are philosophies of parenting which say, if your child is unhappy, you're doing something wrong. It's all about the child's happiness. And we had a family come to our home. They were coming for a marriage counseling, and they brought their child, and the child went up to one of our glass cabinets and was opening the door and slamming this glass door and all our sort of glassware inside the cupboard. So I said to the child, not harshly, I just said,
the mother did nothing.
The mom was.
The mother just ignored. No, she was
first,
there.
of course, I looked at the mom and I said, sort of like, but she did nothing. So I said to the child, stop doing that. I said, please stop doing that. The child looked at me in absolute horror, screamed and ran to mom, and mom looked at me as like, how could you speak to my child and tell them to stop doing what they were doing? Okay, it was a whole different thing. That's what child-centered parenting looks like. It's all about the happiness of the child in the moment. And it can look like a lot of things, like if you're walking out the shop and they've got that aisle with all the sweets in it, and your children are in the trolley and they're trying to would love a sweet, and you have to say no, and they don't get their way, and you're tempted to give in because it'll just make it quieter and easier, and that would be child-centered. You're basically saying the child's unhappy, how can I alleviate, how can I make that unhappiness go away, and you give in to their thing. So those are, generally speaking, the two are like on a spectrum, from there'll be somewhere you'll find you'll be on that spectrum from one or the other. You'll lean towards one or the other of those extremes, and often in reaction to the way you were parented. So if you grew up in a very harsh environment where it was all about rules and regulations and punishment, you could easily swing the other way. So I don't want my children to grow up like that. That was traumatic for me. So I will just make sure my children are as happy as anything. Their childhood is going to be all about happiness. And you often find it swings like that. But I think I want to suggest to you that there's a different way altogether, that you don't have to be on either of those extremes. And if you can, you've done it ahead of, well done. One. And where it's neither about the happiness of the child or about the rules and the regulations, it's about the family centered on God. So that's the picture that the scriptures paint about how we see our parenting. So what you see there is, here you start off with a husband and wife, get married. So this is God's ideal. It doesn't always work like this on earth, but this is the way God would have it, is that a man and a woman come together, and when they get married, they are the family. That is a legitimate family unit. It is the core of the family unit. The marriage is the absolute core of the family. There are no children yet, but it's still a family at that point in God's eyes. And with all the blessing that God gives to a family. And then as children come, they are a welcome addition to the family, but the family is not centered around the child. The family is still centered around the married couple. And if you're, as I say, if they were single parents, it's about the parent is the core of the family. Because if you think about it, your destiny of your children is to leave home. That is the goal of parenting, is that your children, quite soon after school, after university, whatever their life course takes them, is that they would start their own family units and leave home. So it's unwise, very unwise, as a married couple to allow your children to push the married couple apart. Because one day your children leave home and you're left looking at this woman who suddenly after 20 years is not the woman you married 20 years ago when she was young and beautiful, but you have to have that. No, I'm not saying that. Sorry, don't. No.
I'm stirring, don't worry. I know what he's saying. I'm just speaking horrible.
What I'm saying is that if you neglect your marriage, if your children cause you to neglect your marriage, you will find when your children leave home, it's a lot of ground to rebuild after 20 years, and it's hard ground to rebuild. So I think what we're trying to say is that the way God would have it is that your children are a welcome addition into the family for a period of discipleship and training of the hearts, so that they can leave home and that mom and dad can continue that family unit. Do you want to say something, Liv? I think so.
We're not saying that you can't live with your parents, so please don't hear that. But what we're saying is that the Scripture speaks about us leaving our parents and cleaving with our spouse. So it doesn't mean that you can't live under the same roof. As long as that has happened, it's this thing of where the parents are important and the children go and they leave to go and cleave with their spouses. Is that making sense?
So I think practically what this looks like is that children, all humans, come with this incredible selfish heart. So you do not have to instruct a 1 or 2-year-old on how to be selfish. They know how to be selfish. It's the world of a 2-year-old revolves around them. They want everything in the world to go their way. It's a natural inclination of the heart. That is how that selfishness is part of the core of mankind, part of the problem of mankind. And if your style of parenting reinforces it. You can have a style of parenting which encourages that. In other words, you say, well, if your child is unhappy, how can I meet the happiness of the child? Then you are effectively reinforcing selfishness in your children, and that will persist in the long run and into adulthood. Whereas if you have a mindset which says, you know what, this is the core of my family, husband, mom and dad actually come first in this. Our relationship is more important, and I'll actually speak a little bit about how that has more practical application in a moment. Our children are going to come in, but their lives, their needs do not dominate the running of this family. They're a welcome addition, but they are not the core of the family. Because what you are doing there is starting to establish what we would call a culture of honor. So on Saturday morning, we will speak a lot about honor. How do we teach our children to grow up honoring one another? Because if you think about it, one of the central aspects of Christianity is what you might call a love for other people. It's a absolute central tenet of Christianity to say, I do not exist for myself anymore. I exist for the benefit of other people. My life is not my own. I exist so that I can bless other people. I can be a contributor to society. That is the core of Christianity. If you think of so many of the Christian fathers and the incredible men and women of God who changed their worlds, they had a mindset that said, I do not exist for myself. I exist to stop slavery or to take the gospel here or to be a blessing at home or to whatever it is. So that is what we're wanting to bring up in our children. So we want to have a family dynamic where every single child recognizes they are part of a family but they are not the center of the family. They would love to be the center of the family. Every child would love to have the whole family running around them, but that is not godly. The godly picture is you are welcome here, you are part of this is who we are as a family, but you are not the center. Mom and dad, in a sense, carrying the image of God in the family are the center. And yeah. So, okay, let's go into another principle. Don't forget, we'll be coming back to these principles again and again, so it's not the last time you'll see them. What we want to train you as much as possible is to think ahead of your parenting moments. So we know what it's like to always be in reaction to our children and what they are doing, typically what they are doing wrong. Okay? So you'll find a lot of, if you examine your parenting, ask yourself how much of my parenting, my intentional parenting moments, correcting my children, speaking to them, trying to address character issues, is in reaction to something they've done wrong. And I think you'll be surprised at actually how much you are in reaction to bad behavior. So what we're trying to say to you, and we will give you many, many examples of this over the coming period, is that the more you can move your parenting out of reaction to your children's bad behavior and into being one step ahead of them, thinking ahead of them, proactively speaking life to your children as opposed to reacting to bad behavior, you'll find it's far more fruitful. You will get what you want to see in your children if you are ahead of your game. So, for example, just to try and to bring it to life, let's say this is something we had to deal with, so it may not be a relevant example for you, but maybe you could think of something similar. So when Sheila would go shopping in Pick n Pay or Spar, wherever it was, they would have what we termed the aisle of death as you closed in on the payment area. So this is typically at the end of the day, so your children, we'd have 3 or 4 children in the trolley, because they're all these escapees, youngsters who want to run around, so they have to be in the trolley, and then they're coming back at 5 o'clock towards the till, and you go through that aisle where all the sweets are. The shops put them there deliberately, and knowing that all these moms are going to bring their children. And of course, the children, their first thing they want is they would ask for sweets. And then when we'd say no because we're about to go home for supper, there would be a tantrum in the trolley, and now you have to react to bad behavior because you don't want to leave a tantrum. So then what we were finding is Sheila was always in reaction to bad behavior.
So what I did is I knew I'd have to go shopping, and I told them beforehand, before we went, I said, when we go shopping, this is what we're going to do. and then I would tell them exactly what I expected and then what the consequence would be if they didn't listen to me. So I said, I expect you to, because I had 4, I'd have one here, one there, and then 2 older ones. And they always had to have their hand on the trolley, so they couldn't go darting around the shop and losing them. Have you ever lost a child in the shop? It's exhausting. So they had to stay holding on the trolley at all times with one hand. And then when we got to the aisle of death, the sweet aisle, they were not allowed to ask for anything. If they did, there would be a consequence, which we had spoken about. And it changed my life because I could now go shopping at 6 o'clock in the evening after a long day and not go mad.
So you'll notice the proactive part is, so we knew there was trouble coming, so get in there first before you react to trouble. And also what happens is when your children, when they start to exhibit self-control. So now you can think about the situation. You've got these 4 tired, hungry children going past all these sweets, and halfway down, you can see them. They're desperately tempted. They want to ask. They want that thing. Okay, but even if it's for the first 3 steps that they haven't asked, get in there first and praise them. Guys, I'm so impressed with you. Well done. Nobody's asked for anything. You guys are A team. Super. Well done, guys. Because you don't want to be in reaction to bad behavior. You want to be emphasizing the good ahead of bad behavior.
And then it stops them from asking, because now they go, oh, this is a good thing. I mustn't ask. Okay, I want to hear that again. So
that would be...
For us, we felt disobedience meant it had to be a consequence that had pain. So for us, we did give hidings. Because it was disobedience, because blatant disobedience. We said, you may not do this, therefore. But the one section, which we're doing tomorrow night or Thursday? Tomorrow night, where we show you all the different consequences that you can, and it's a toolbox, because not all children respond to that kind of discipline. Yeah.
So another example, if you have more than one child and they are playing together, very often there will be a fight that emerges, maybe even bloodshed. Okay? So now, if you wait as a parent for that situation, you now have to react because they've done something wrong. So you actually do have to react, and it's typically involving some form of unpleasant consequences, and it's a negative situation. So, as a mom or a dad, if you are standing in the kitchen and you can hear your children playing, and you can hear them starting to argue, which is normally the sign that it's going to, quite quickly, somebody's going to get hit on the head with a Lego block or a plastic truck or something. At that point, before they've got into bad behavior, as a mom and dad, you go in there and you deal with it before it's deteriorated to the point that you have to react to bad behavior. So you might just go in with a warning, for example. Say, guys, I can hear you getting a little bit heated and you're starting to argue. Just remember, and you would emphasize what you're wanting to see. I want you to, maybe to the older sibling, you'd say, I know they might be frustrating you, but you must exercise, and call it what it is. I want you to exercise patience. And youngster, do not frustrate your older brother. So you're teaching them, but you're teaching them before they've done anything wrong. And then I would really encourage you, try to emphasize something good about it. So you might say, remember yesterday when you guys were playing, and you were playing together so nicely, and you were having such fun and laughing together. That's what you want to be like. So you emphasize the good that you want to see. You might warn them about if they carry on down that line, there's going to be a problem. But you've got in there so that you don't have to react to bad behavior.
And this is a tool you can use for all ages. So if you've got a teenager, we've said to our kids, if they're in a situation, they go to someone's house or they go to a party and it just goes bad and they know they don't want to be there, they can always say, my mom says I'm not allowed to do it, or I don't mind looking like the baddie, and they can phone. I've said to all of them, you can phone me at 3 in the morning, I don't care, I will come and find you and help you. It doesn't matter. Even if you're in 3 towns away, I will organize, I will drive there, don't you worry, I will come and help you. So it's almost like a proactive, that if something happens, they know how to handle it. And
just on this last thing on this point, we were taught this particular tip, which we have found incredibly helpful for us as a family, is what we might say is having a team identity. So
a family identity.
A family identity that you refer to often. So, okay, our surname is a very long surname, Lechmer-Ertel, so it doesn't sort of just roll off the tongue.
They didn't hear it's Lechmer L Ertel O. L-O.
Lechmer-Ertel.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to use the Roberts, because the Roberts,
Have a-
I know their surname, and it's a nice short surname, okay? So let's say, for example, if you're wanting to see certain aspects of behavior, that your children are maybe prone towards anger, one of your children, you might say proactively, not in reaction to a moment of anger, at the dinner table, for example. You start to talk about, guys, we are Roberts. That's who we are as a family. As the Roberts, we're going to be a family who are kind and generous, and you speak what you want to see in a out of conflict moment. And sometimes you'll find when you set yourself a high standard of parenting, like we're talking about here, you'll go into a context with another, maybe you've got a family dinner with a whole lot of your extended family, and their kids are running all over the place, and you've tried to bring a measure of order into your family. So your children are looking at all these other kids just doing all the things they're not allowed to do. And they go, but Mom, they're allowed to do it. Okay, now that's a difficult question to answer, especially in the public gathering. Maybe it's your family and friends, because now there's a contrast between this bad behavior and your children, and they're like looking at you. So quietly, we wouldn't do this in terms of a family announcement to everybody. We would just take our children and say, we are Lechmer-Ertels, that's our surname. We don't behave like that. We do it like this, and we would explain in the moment as quickly as we can. We say, God has told us we're going to be a people who are like this. This is who we are as a family. We're not those people. This is who we are. And it looks like something. And we would emphasize the good that we want to see in our children. And we would coach them. Again, it's like paint on a building. It's layer upon layer upon layer of affirming your children's identity in your family, who God has made you to be as a family. And you find suddenly they're very proud to be a family. Question? Would you try and listen to that? Maybe pass you the mic. Right?
The whole team situation. So most times, proactively, I can tell my daughter, let's say if we want to get into a shop, and I'll tell her, if you cry for sweets, this and that, I won't do this, or I won't get into the shop with you. And then she's like, okay, but when we get in there, she will. But if he does the same thing, she won't. She will be quiet. She won't ask for sweets. Am I doing something wrong? It feels like I have to work double or triple, and he just has to say.
It sounds so normal. It's irritating, hey?
I think, there's a reality that dad carries a lot more authority than mom in the family, and that's, I think, the way God has it. So I can't argue for or against it. I don't think it's I just think it's the way it is. So that doesn't mean to say it's right or wrong. We'll probably speak a lot about this tomorrow, when it actually speaks about consistency. In other words, it's the mom and dad must react in the same way if they transgress. In other words, if they don't obey, it must be the same consequence. It doesn't matter whether mom or dad do it. So some children, so for example, Sheila's actually a lot more, did you say something?
Go.
That's fine. So Sheila's actually a lot more strict than me. I'm actually quite a gentle person. And Sheila, like the kids know, if mom says something, you just that's done, Yeah, and you do. Whereas for me, they might negotiate with me a little bit, And but actually, when the chips when it gets serious, I can just clear my throat. Say, guys, that's not acceptable. And they just listen. So they know
They don't do that for me.
Yeah. But they might not do that for
And
mom.
kids are clever. They know if you're if you're not yes or no. So our two younger boys, Jonathan and Dile, they know if they want to watch a movie, they ask me. And if Richard always says no. But they know that if they don't want a bath tonight, we call it pig night. If they don't want a bath that night, they say to Dad, can we have pig night? Because he always says yes. And if they ask me, I always say, no, get in the bath.
So if I can delay answering your question more thoroughly, because I think we'll tackle a lot of it tomorrow, and on how to be very consistent in that, yeah. Okay, last point. Is it up? So, last one. for tonight. It's absolutely vital that there is parental vision, which is really what we are talking about, vision for parenting, where you're going with this, but absolutely core is unity. So there are so many scriptures where God talks about unity and the value of unity and how he blesses, he commands a blessing where there's unity. So we were taught this when we were young parents, and it's probably been the biggest single thing that has not just changed our parenting, but actually changed our relationship, our marriage, and given us an incredibly strong foundation for the rest of our lives. We truly are the best of friends, and a lot of it's due to what we learned here and what I'm going to teach you now, is what was called for us couch time, or we called it coffee zone, okay? So what the person said to us is, going back to the fact that a child is not the center of the family. Our relationship is the center of the family, with God in the middle of all of that. So he says one of the ways you can demonstrate this practically to your children is you have a time of the day when mom and dad spend together in front of their children, but not interacting with their children. So for us, it started off at the end of the day. I used to go to work at that point, and I work from home. So I'd go to work, I'd come home from work. The typical scenario would work out as the dogs would have heard the car coming, and the dogs would charge out to greet me, closely followed by 2 or 3 children, however many we had at that point, rushing out to greet me. And somewhere at the back was a very tired mother who's been at home with the children all day. And I would wade my way through the dogs and clamoring children and go and greet my wife. And then we would sit down together and we would say to the children, Mom and Dad just want 5 minutes together. And we started off with a very small period of time. Mom and Dad, and I would literally say this, I'd say, Mom is the most important thing in this family to me. And I would say that to my children, not saying I don't love you, I'm just saying I love this woman. This is my wife. She is important to me. I want to spend time with her first. That what we would do is we would set a mat on the floor and we'd have some special toys that the children would only play with in this time. So they were actually quite excited. So they would sit down. We would be sitting on the couch there, but we're not speaking to our children. And we'd have a cup of tea together or a cup of coffee together. And what it does is it shows the children that mom and dad's time is really important. Because what you'll find in many families, if you don't do this, is that the scenario plays out a little bit differently. Dad comes home from work, or mom and dad come home from work. They see their children for a short period of time. Then it's the night routine of bath and supper and homework, and the family's like really busy. Then the children go to bed, and then mom and dad like, oh, we survived another day. And then they sit down and have their time together. It's also not a bad thing to have, but your point is your children never see mom and dad close together, having their relationship. It's really important that your children see you as mom and dad love each other. One of the greatest securities that you can bring to your children is that they see that mom and dad love each other. So you know what, even if you are in a difficult stage of your marriage, because I understand we've been through ups and downs like every marriage, it's very normal to have times when you don't actually like each other and you're irritated with each other. Okay, you still love each other, you're committed, but you don't like the other person, all right? And that's real. This is this real marriage. Okay? You sit down together and you mumble to each other. I don't care what you do, but you look like you love each other.
So we now do our what we call coffee zone in the morning. We wake up early, our kids wake up early, and we have a cup of coffee together, and that's our time. And we say to the kids, because now they don't play on a mat on the floor, that was just to get them used to it. They can come and go, but they're not allowed to talk to us. And it's been amazing. Some mornings, we talk like this because we are so irritated and we're dealing with the issue that we don't want the children to hear about. And the other times, we're just enjoying each other's company. Even when we travel, there'll be times we'll get in the car and we're traveling to go somewhere and we say to the children, coffee zone, and they're in the back of the car and they go, oh, when can we talk to you? And we say half an hour and then we chat. They're not allowed to disturb us. We talk and then we say, okay, coffee zone's over, you can talk to us now. And then they're just seeing us interact.
So it's become a bit of a family joke, and because they're all older now. But you know what? They're going to do that with their spouses. They're going to protect the marriage unit above the children, which is what it needs to happen. So we would really encourage you, do it in a way that helps the children succeed. So if you're first starting, do it for 2 minutes, because your young children are used to having your immediate attention. So put them with some nice toys.
Proactive parenting. So
Proactive parenting. So have some nice toys for them, something they can do, and you guys sit down quickly, and then you say, Mom and Dad is having some time alone, but you do it in front of them, and you chat for a few minutes, and then as soon as you see them starting to lose their own ability to self-concentrate or self-play, then fine, you've done well. And then engage with the children, and then I'll go and play a game of ball with the children or something, go swim in the pool with the children. And little by little, we just extended that time to whereas now we can sit for 45 minutes with our kids, and you'll see them like they're circling around, and then when we put our coffee mugs down, and they're like in there. And it's wonderful, it's a value that is important.
And one of the beautiful things is that if you are struggling in your marriage, which is very real, this makes such a difference. It's a real key to longevity in the marriage. And as a wife, it makes me feel so special that my husband would want to actually make time and spend 5 minutes with me. Now, that might sound a bit silly, but it makes me feel really, really loved. And when he says to the children, no, I want to be with Mum, I can highly recommend. It's life-changing. It's been the most amazing thing for us. And then in that time, we also talk about parenting vision. So we go, okay, there's this one issue we really have to work on. How are we going to do it? And you get to discuss it. Because sometimes we're so busy, we don't even talk about what needs to be said and done.
So when we talk about this, we would encourage you, they strongly encourage you to not move into implementing what we're talking about from a parenting point of view if you are not in unity as a married couple. And it's very real, because depending how you were brought up, you will think differently about parenting. So we see it often where one of the husband, for example, will be naturally quite a harsh parent, and the mom, it's all child-centered parenting and the happiness of the child. And until those can come into unity, it's unwise to go into parenting, actually. When I say go into it, to strongly implement what we are suggesting. I think it's really important that you would invest the time as a married couple to discuss everything we've talked about. Some of it you might think, that's not for us. But that one thing, that's what God highlighted to us. How are we as a couple going to bring this into our family? Or you might think, we're really struggling with this issue in one child. How are we going to do it as a couple? And you wrestle with it, because it might be the dad is saying, well, we're going to have to just spank the child more. And the mom's going, no, there might be a better way. And you just have to work that out. That's what it's not a bad thing to have disagreement, but don't let it break you apart. Work it until you come to a place where you can say, look, we're both in agreement, we're going to parent like this. Because if you're not in agreement, what will happen is your children very quickly will pick up, mom's a soft target, or dad's a soft target on this issue, and they will go under in a sense, the protection of that parent, further bringing disunity to the family. It's a very unhelpful place where children are encouraged to manipulate one parent against another. So don't progress quickly until there's unity. It's a gift to your family to be in unity in that thing.
So tomorrow, because we've finished now,
yeah.
what we're going to cover is something called first-time obedience, which is a principle of actually, do you know that you can train your children to obey you the first time you speak? It is possible. I did it, and I did it with 4. Okay, and so we're going to be showing you how to do that, and that's generally a whole lot of.
We'll couple that tomorrow.
Yeah.
So we would encourage you to come. I know there are just the practical reality that not everybody, not all families, mom and dad could be here tonight, but as much as possible, it is better if you can be here. If you can arrange a babysitter or something that both mom and dad can be here, it just makes it easier, because sometimes it's difficult to convey the things. I'm also, you'll notice I have my slides. I've put them on the computer there. There is a PDF document. You're welcome to use them. I don't mind. I notice you've been taking pictures, but I'm going to leave the material there.